Hello everybody and welcome to this afternoon's webinar on submitting your payroll to HMRC. My name's Calvin and I'll be your presenter and host today, and we have the lovely Duncan who will be available to answer any questions that you may have throughout today's session. So for today's session, what we're going to be looking at is, firstly, we're going to look at an FPS, so what is an FPS and what is included. We're then going to look at the same for an EPS. Then following on from that, we're going to look at various different ways to review your submissions. So where to look in order to review what submissions you have sent across to HMRC. And then we'll end with some further support and some remaining time for any leftover questions. The webinar is scheduled for about 30 minutes with the presentation roughly lasting between 20 to 25. So we'll have a bit of time at the end for any questions if you need to. So let's get started. We'll start with an FPS. So what is an FPS? An FPS, or full payment submission, to give it its full name. This sends your payroll information across to HMRC. Now they must be submitted after processing each pay run. So that is if you have number of pay frequencies. So if you've got weekly and monthly payrolls, for example, you will be submitting an FPS each pay frequency. Bear in mind though, you can only send one FPS per pay frequency, and that goes off tax periods as well. So for example, if you are a monthly payroll and you have submitted an FPS on the 6th of the month, you will not be able to send a following FPS until the 6th of the following month. So that must be remembered, that depending on your pay frequency, you can only send one per tax period for that frequency. That's tax week, 2 weekly, 4 weekly, monthly. So bear that in mind. What's included in an FPS? So first and foremost, you've got your payments and deductions. So a fairly obvious one there. Followed on by employer and employee information, so national insurance numbers, which you can see on the screenshot there. National insurance and PAYE information. You have new starters or leavers, so any information relating to new starters or leavers are sent across. If you start paying someone a workplace pension, this will be sent across in an FPS as well. And if an employee changes to become a director, so if an employee moves from regular employee to director status, then this again will be included. Finally, you will have any statutory payments as well that are included in that. Quick note on that previous point before. So as I mentioned, you'll not be able to send two full payment submissions or FPSs in the same tax period for the same pay frequency. If you need to make any amendments, or if you've needed to make any changes to any of the information that has been submitted, then you'll be needing to send an FPS adjustment. Now we cover FPS adjustments in a bit more detail when we go through our corrections webinar, but just bear in mind, if you've sent that, don't worry if you need to change it. There is an option within the 50 Cloud Payroll that will allow you to send that adjustment across to HMRC. So what I'm going to do now is we'll jump into the program and we'll go through and we'll demonstrate sending an FPS, and we'll have a look at how it works in the program. Once I've sent one, I'll then try and send another one just to kind of show you what pops up if you do try to send two in the same tax period. So here we are in our Sage 50 Cloud Payroll program. Now a quick way to figure out whether or not an FPS has been sent for that particular pay period or that tax period, check your last FPS date. So whenever you send an FPS, your last FPS date will update. So I can see here on my payroll, we've calculated and updated the pay for the 31st of May, but the last FPS date wasn't until the 30th of April. Now what that means is that was in the previous tax period, which means I can send an FPS for this tax period. So let's go ahead and get that submitted. So on the left-hand side in the payroll, so if we click on payroll in the bottom left, and then you'll see full payment submission in the top left. Underneath, you'll see there is FPS adjustment. So if you did need to make any changes, the option is just underneath your regular full payment submission. Of course, if you are using the payroll process map, if it looks like this, you'll see your full payment submission option here at the end, followed by FPS adjustment if you need to. That's for anyone who likes to use that payroll process map. Me personally, I like to work down the list of tasks here on the left-hand side. So we'll go ahead and click Full Payment Submission. You will note as well in the bottom right-hand corner, my process date is set as the 31st of May, which is the same as my last updated date. That is deliberate, as you should be sending an FPS with the same process date as what you updated your employees. Don't worry about this big red warning. You will hopefully never get this. This is simply because we do not have a direct link to HMRC, whereas we're in a classroom environment. So if I click on Continue, see that the data is being built. This is the screen you will get in the first instance, rather than that big red warning. So we'll go ahead and click Continue. We'll just be checking that all our details, so our gateway registration, ID and password is all correct, and our company details are correct too. Click Submit. There we can see we have a brief overview of our employees included in that FPS, along with a total liability amount. You can print this page for your own records if you wish to. Once you're happy, you can go ahead and click Submit. The green bar will scroll along a little longer than it did on my screen there for you. As I mentioned, we don't have that direct link, so it just goes through straight away. And if we close that, you'll now see that the last FPS date has now changed to the 31st of May. And that's it. So that is your full payment submission done, and you've submitted your data across to HMRC. Now, as I mentioned, if you go to try and send a full payment submission again for the same tax period that you already have done, when you click on this full payment submission option, you'll get a little warning message just to say that they've checked the software and there aren't any employees to include in the full payment submission. The reason for that is all of our employees have already been included in one. So that's just a quick update of what happens when you try. So if you ever get that message, it's likely that you may have some employees included, or all of your employees are already sent an FPS, in which case check your last FPS date and then check on your process date. Right, back to the presentation. So that's an FPS, and that is how you would submit your full payment submission across to HMRC. So now what we're going to be doing is looking at the next submission, which is your employer payment summary, or EPS as it's otherwise known. So what's an EPS? So an employer payment summary is sent alongside an FPS. So this is very rarely done instead of, but there is one circumstance where you would, but I'll get to that in a moment. An EPS is also sent to claim employment allowance once a year. So now that we've just completed year end, so that wasn't that long ago, a lot of you will have submitted claims for employment allowance. If you are eligible to do that, you would be submitting an employer payment summary. Bear in mind, you only ever need to do that once a year. Once you've submitted that and asked that you are claiming it, then you will of course be able to, well, not be able to, you'll not be able to claim again because you already have, is what I was trying to say. Apologies there. Okay, an EPS is also sent when there has been no pay in a tax month. So as I mentioned, there is one scenario where you would send an EPS instead of an FPS, and that is when you have not paid anyone in an entire tax month. So this is where you would send an EPS to state there's been no pay. The deadline for an EPS is always the 19th of the following tax month. So you have up till the 19th of the following month to submit your EPS. So for example, we have until the 19th of June to submit your employer payment summary information for this tax month. So what's included? Firstly, any statutory parental payments that are to be recovered. So you'll be including those in an FPS. Secondly, you'll have your reporting of any apprenticeship levy. So again, if you have any apprenticeship levy details you need to report, then these will go across in an EPS as well. And then thirdly, if you are in the construction industry and you have any CIS deductions, you will be submitting that information across in an EPS as well. As with an FPS, there are a couple of links on these slides in the handout if you would like to have a look at those. Okay, that's an EPS. So let's jump back into the program now and let's have a look at submitting an EPS. So here we are back in our program. Now you would submit an EPS at the end of each month. Even if you've got weekly payrolls, you'll see when we go through, there's only an option for monthly, but we'll go into more details about the EPS as we go through and submit one. So to get to that, what you need to do is click on e-submissions in the bottom left. Then you'll need to click on employer payment summary in the top left. So there's EPS. In this instance, you'll be asked, why are you submitting an EPS? So again, you're either adjusting your payment to HMRC because you can recover statutory payments, we've suffered CIS deductions, or we're reporting any apprenticeship levy. We're going to choose that option for the demonstration. However, you can do that you are informing HMRC that no payment is due for tax month 2, or if there was no payment due for tax month 1 and then previous tax months, or if there is no payment due for tax month 3 and future tax months. So again, as I mentioned, if you've not paid anyone for a full tax month, you just need to submit an employer payment summary and choose one of the bottom 3 options. But we're going to go ahead and select the top one for adjusting your payment to HMRC. So I click next. As you'll see there, you only have an option for tax month and it is grayed out. So you cannot change this. It is based on what your process date is and what the actual date is as well. So this is unchangeable and all depends on your process date. Here we have your options. Now this will be pulled through automatically for you. So you've got your statutory maternity, statutory paternity, statutory shared parental pay, statutory adoption pay, and any parental bereavement pay. So again, any statutory payments that you can recover will be pulled through in this section. However, if you wish to do so, or you are completing this manually, you are more than welcome to amend this manually as so. Just bear in mind though, once you have amended it manually, then it will be needed to be changed every time that you go ahead and submit. So you're kind of overriding what the program thinks is being pulled through if you do this manually. A quick note on this as well, the figures that you see here will be year-to-date values. So you will always be submitting an EPS with full year-to-date values. So for example, if you missed tax month 1, fear not, you can simply just submit tax month 2 because tax month 1's details will also be included. Each EPS that you send overwrites the previous one, but we still recommend running one every month to ensure that your information is being sent correctly and on time to HMRC. But yes, the amounts that you see in here are always year-to-date values. So that's the statutory payments. If we click next, you'll see here where you can enter a value of any CIS deductions you have suffered year-to-date. And then again, if we click next, you'll see here the apprenticeship levy information. Now again, both of these will be picked up automatically, but you can of course change these manually should you wish to or should you need to. And then once you click next, all it says is you've now completed the information. And then when I hit finish, we will go through to submitting an EPS. So you'll notice there I get the big red warning again. Again, that is something you will not get. But you'll see there we now go into the employer payment summary. So we'll click next and we'll check again our details are correct. Hit submit. And you'll see here that we have our details. Now I mentioned earlier that you would submit an employer payment summary for employment allowance, but you would only do that once a year at the beginning of the tax year. Every other employer payment summary after that will always state N/A on your employment allowance box. So even if you are claiming it and you have submitted that claim in the beginning of the tax year, don't worry, it is correct that everything else will say not applicable for the remainder. Because as I mentioned, you only need to do that once. You just need to tell them that you are claiming it, and that is it. So we'll go ahead and submit that. And that's it. So that is your employer payment summary now submitted. Now, unlike a full payment submission, an employer payment summary can be sent multiple times in the month. As I mentioned, it simply overwrites the previous one sent. So if you've made a mistake in one of them, you can just go ahead and resubmit a corrected EPS if needs be. And again, if you miss a month, as it carries over year-to-date values, you can just simply send one the following month should you want to. So that is an EPS. So we've now covered both a full payment submission and an EPS. So you can see how quick the submissions are nowadays. So this is thanks to the introduction of RTI, which of course has made year end as well a lot easier in terms of submitting all your data across to HMRC. So you've now submitted an EPS, you've submitted your FPS or a full payment submission adjustment or an FPS adjustment. And you just need to double check or review those submissions. So what can you do to have a look at those submissions? The first one is your FPS viewer. So in here, you can view details of each FPS sent. You can export these to Excel or as an XML file. Customize the columns that show in the viewer. So you can see there from the screenshot, you've got multiple columns. You can in fact customize these, which I will show you. Or you can then, of course, print this screen so you can print that overview. Before I show you the FPS viewer, just to show you the second option, you have your e-submissions log. So obviously, FPS viewer is your FPS. Next, you've got your e-submissions log, which views details of all of your submissions sent. Again, you can print the summary or you can go into details and print that. So you can go into further details on that. This also shows the type of submission that was sent. So as you can see from the screenshot, you have a year-end submission down the bottom there. You have an FPS adjustment that we sent as well. And obviously the rest were FPS. And there is your employment allowance submission as well. It also shows the status of a submission. So a good bit of best practice is if there's any queries to whether a submission was sent or not, you can see here next to the status. If it says failed, then you know that didn't go through. If it says success, you know that the program has sent that through successfully. Now, one thing to note about the e-submissions log, your date is when the submission was sent, not the process date. So we'll show you when we jump into the demo, because as you know, it is the 12th of May today. Even though we had the process date as the 31st of May, the date should be showing as the 12th. So when you actually submitted it, so the actual date that you submitted those submissions, that is what the date will show you, as well as the time. So that being said, let's dive back into the program and I'll show you both the FPS viewer, lots of S's in this, and the e-submission log. Okay, so let's go into e-submissions. We're already there. So it's e-submissions in the bottom left. And you'll see up here, you have the e-submissions log and the FPS viewer. So we'll start with the e-submissions log, since it is at the top of the list. And here you can see a similar screenshot to what you saw on the screenshot, sorry, a similar window to what you saw on the screenshot. Now it goes in reverse date order, but you can, of course, change this. If I click on the date, we can flip it around so that the most recent appears at the top rather than at the bottom. So you can see there, here is the EPS and the FPS we just sent. I did, of course, do an EPS prior to the presentation today just to make sure everything was working okay. But you can see there we've got our FPS and EPS sent on the 12th of the 5th, 2022 at 14:08, which is when we did the FPS demonstration, and 17 minutes past 2 as well when we did the EPS demonstration. So that's it. You can see there, if you want to go into more details about the submission, you have this details option here. So you can click on that, or alternatively, simply double click on the submission that you're wanting to look at. You then have your HMRC message. And then if I click on more details, here we can see a very high level breakdown of what was included in that submission. Of course, you can print this if you need to. Again, I'll just quickly show you the EPS, go into more details. So you can see the S&P recovered, we entered in manually, and then of course what tax month it was, your annual allowance for apprenticeship levy. So you have all of your available information here. Again, all printable. So if we close out of there and go into our FPS viewer, so as I mentioned, the e-submission log gives you a fairly high level view of your FPS details. So if you'd like to know a little bit more, if you pop into the FPS viewer, and we wait for my program to speed up a little bit. Apologies, taking a little bit of a while there. Here we are. So now again, you can see your FPS is on the left-hand side. You also get the date. So you can see here, it's in a bit of a different format, but you will also get the date that it was sent. So the FPS that we sent today is this one here, because it is the 12th of the 5th, 2022. It goes backwards, year, month, date, rather than date, month, year, as well as the time at the end. So here we have our detail screen. So if we scroll along, we'll be able to see a detailed breakdown of what was included in that FPS. So you can see we've got student loan, if they have a start date or leave date. These are current employees, so they won't have either of those. And again, if I click the columns option in the top right here, you'll get this tick box list. So we can add columns to this view should you wish to see anything specific about that FPS. Again, we can add the national insurance category. So click close. Again, it refreshes there. I scroll to the end. There you go. You've got your NI category available there to you as well. As mentioned, you can print this report, export this to Excel, or export this as an XML file if you need to. Again, if you want to get rid of any columns, you're simply unticking what's available there. Again, this is only to add columns. The columns that are in here are defaulted and can't be removed. So this is just to add any extra information you wish to see. Again, you can have gross pay for tax to date, or gross pay for tax for the period, gross earnings for national insurance, etc. Again, all of that is available to look at should you wish to. And that is how to review your submissions. Now, one thing to mention on this as well is it is very important to try not to compare your FPS amount, total liability on your FPS, with a P32 report. Now, the reason for that is a P32 report not only gives you your total liabilities, but also includes any recoverables such as maternity or statutory parental pay. So when you are, and doesn't factor in the employment allowance in an FPS that it does on the P32. So because of that, you can sometimes get differing values. Neither are wrong. It's just that there are details missing from an FPS that are included in a P32. So that's why we sort of say, look, you need to send out an EPS every month so that your P32 does then match what HMRC are due. So as long as you've sent an FPS and an EPS, then your P32 will be correct, but try not to compare your FPS liabilities or the FPS viewer as such with the P32 report. Okay, so that wraps up the main body of the presentation today. What I'd like to talk to you now about is just a bit of further support. So what further support options do you have outside of the webinar? So you have first and foremost the Help Center. So you saw a couple of links in the presentation. Those guides can be found just by searching in our Sage Help Center. So you can search our knowledge base. And of course, you've got support guides in there as well. So various different support guides based on topics. So you've got pensions, online services, correcting mistakes. I mentioned that FPS adjustment. So that can all be found available in our Help Center. We do run webinars every Thursday at 2 o'clock. So again, you can find details of these in our help center itself. So you'll see there from the screenshot in the top right. Well, it's quite small, so I'll hover my mouse over for you just here where it says webinars. If you click on that link, it will take you to a guide with a schedule. There are videos available here as well as the get in touch options as well. Secondly, we have Sage University. So here we can get access to e-learning, some Sage certifications, as well as some bite-sized learning. Again, free of charge and all available to do in your own time at your own pace. So there's a great library of courses available to look at sageu.com. Again, that link will be available in the handout. So that pretty much wraps up today's presentation. So for the last 2 minutes, we'll go on mute now. We'll answer any remaining questions that you may have. So feel free to get them through. Then I will pop back at 12:30 to say our final goodbye. If you are leaving us at this point, again, it's been an absolute pleasure to see so many of you join us on today's webinar. So we love seeing the number of people that like to come and listen to me talk about all sorts of things about payroll, as well as Duncan's webinars as well. If you are leaving, of course, there is going to be a bit of a short survey that you'll be presented with when you exit the session. Duncan and I would be extremely grateful if you could spend just a little bit of time filling that out. They are absolutely vitally important to us when it comes to designing and improving any of the webinars. So I'm going to pop on mute now, help answer some of those questions that are coming through, and I'll be back on at 12:30 to say goodbye. Okay, so we'll wrap things up for there, just whilst Duncan answers the final remaining question. Just wanted to say again, a big thank you to everyone who has turned up for today's session. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you have found it interesting and certainly valuable as well, for that matter. Again, quick reminder that when you do leave the session today, you will be directed to a short survey. Again, it is vitally important for us when we build any future webinars or look to improve the current webinars that we gain your feedback from them. It is something that we desperately need in order to make them as good and as valuable as possible for you guys in the future. So I can just see Duncan wrapping up that final question there. So looks like he has finally got it answered there. So we'll wrap things up. Thank you so much again. I hope you're all looking after yourselves, staying safe out there, and we'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching, and goodbye.